Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. We'll just give another minute or so to allow people to log in, and then we will jump into our discussions.
Hey, I'm going to jump back on a different Wi-Fi internet, so I'll be right back.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. We'll give it another minute to have folks log in, and then we'll get started. All right. So we can probably go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. We are recording, just an FYI. If you all would like to introduce yourselves in the chat. And we might have a shorter meeting today, but we have some discussions that hopefully can be nice and robust. And so we'll start with Kimberly. And sharing just some retention data that we've been talking about offline and wanted to share with the group as just kind of putting this on the radar and, help us plan for the future.
Hey there, I'm Kimberly Albers, and I serve as the Homelessness Assistance Program Manager in the Community Services Department of the county. And I always like to explain that, a lot of the funding that comes to the county, with the exception of healthcare dollars that address homelessness, often flow through our department. And so we've really grown during the pandemic. And so wanted to share, we had a good discussion last time. And one of the things, and I'm not sure, Landon, I literally am just landing at my desk this morning. So we had discussed that there was kind of a difference between Ventura and San Luis Obispo and our data. Does anyone remember that, or were they part of that discussion? So I don't know, Landon, if you could quick find that slide, or we could just kind of briefly, I don't want to, spend too much time on it, but what I promised this group was that I would meet with Ventura and San Luis Obispo and try and really get a better understanding of what made, maybe I'll just wait. Seems like a lot of folks are still jumping on, huh?
Yeah.
And just to give everyone a reference point, since I don't think everyone that's here today was on that call. But basically one of the observations was that San Luis Obispo and Ventura County, Ventura having a similar homeless population to us, larger general population. Thank you, Landon. Can everyone see that slide? So what we're looking at here is returns to homelessness. And I'll quick take you through a few of these acronyms since I'm going to chat about this again today. SO, if you see that in the first column of each of the slides, is street outreach. So the exit 2 years ago was from street outreach. Then there's the exits from emergency shelter, ES. And then there's the exits from transitional housing, TH. We don't have any safe havens in our system, and I think Ventura has a small safe haven. And then exit was from PH, or permanent housing. And then as you move across each chart, you'll see if the return to homelessness was in less than 6 months, if the return to homelessness was from 6 to 12 months, or the return to homelessness was from 13 to 24 months, and then the total in 2 years. And so, basically adding up across to give you that 2-year number. And so what we observed, right, was that our returns to homelessness were higher than both of our neighboring counties. And also sort of even more remarkable than that was that both counties, even though San Luis Obispo would be a much smaller homeless population than Santa Barbara County, had significantly more exits from permanent housing. And so because we've all had lots of rapid rehousing dollars, those red circles, I was pretty intrigued by and wanted to understand their system better, because more exits from permanent housing generally would lower returns to homelessness, right? Because rapid rehousing is included in permanent housing and is a permanent housing program. So I met with both counties, and it turns out that the vast majority of their exits from permanent housing in those years were from what's called the Housing Support Program, which is a CalWORKS program for families with minor children that is like, it's like rapid rehousing, but for families with minor children. And so upon deeper digging, it looks like that maybe their housing support programs were much more robust than what we were seeing locally, and that they had consistently gotten the data in HMIS, where our county was more in a transition. And I apologize, I'm right by a window. There was we were still transitioning to getting all of our housing support program placements in HMIS. But even if we look at this year's data, which I'm going to be able to show you, we are still kind of underperforming in exits from permanent housing, which likely is impacting our returns to homelessness. So for example, like, why would I make an assumption like that? So you can see from the slide that exits from emergency shelter, we have many more people exiting from emergency shelter than either of the two counties, and our retention rate are, less returns to homelessness than the other two counties. So really appreciate everyone kind of encouraging me to dig deeper in these and try and see what we could learn. So we are working with the housing support program that I mentioned for families with minor children that are experiencing homelessness is administered through our Department of Social Services. And so we're having some ongoing talks with them to kind of figure out why, not just because we know part of it's because all of the data was not entered at that time, but still that we'd be sort of underperforming in the number of folks being housed through the housing support program as compared to our neighboring counties. So this was all the data that you're seeing here was what was officially submitted to HUD back in the late spring of 2022, but it represents data that's a little old by now. So what I wanted to share today are a couple of updates because we do have kind of a draft look at the newer data. And I think we kind of briefly glimpsed, not a visual, but talked about it last time. So let's see, Landon, if I can, any questions? That was a lot, right? A lot of numbers on the screen. So would be happy to try and, shape that or answer any questions that had come up there. But I did definitely want to circle back since the questions had come up last time we met.
Kimberly, do you have any more specifics to reference just in terms of that their programming was more robust than ours? I know there's obviously the consideration for data input and timely data reporting, but I'm just curious in terms of the robust programs that they had available, what you saw as our specific gaps that we don't have available here.
No, thank you. And so I think what we're seeing, and I think this is actually something that everyone can be part of, so a really good point to bring up that I did not bring up yet, is that we're seeing our housing support program locally serving more people in homelessness prevention services. And so that doesn't look like our rapid rehousing, that it's sort of two separate programs under one bonnet, where it looks like very clearly when I compare the data that they're serving many more families that have actually fallen out, and then they're entering back, getting back in, and then exiting from that intervention. So I think maybe one of the big takeaways for this group is one thing, right? If you are serving a family with minor children, Department of Social Services now is the best funded intervention for preventing a family with minor children from falling out. But also, if a family with minor children does fall out and they are CalWORKs eligible, this is a very important qualifier, that we want to be linking them to Department of Social Services first, right? We want those families who are actually falling out to get this service. And it sounds like in comparing the data that we don't have the megaphone out loud enough, right? When we're letting everyone know, we often think of, Good Samaritan Shelter and Transition House being, our family providers, which they absolutely are. But again, now we're talking about sort of millions of dollars coming in for rapid rehousing in the Department of Social Services, specifically for this group. So we want to make sure that we're preserving those other funds, right, for families and others that may not have access to the CalWORKs system. So yes, so I think what we're, in addition to, like I said, that data gap, because this is 2 years prior, right? So even 2 years prior to last year, that they're definitely serving more on a prevention end than a rapid rehousing end in the current system in Santa Barbara County. But we all see, so everyone remember this number, see how it says in the Santa Barbara County number here. I don't know, Landon, if you can put a cursor on it, where it says 126 exits from permanent housing in the 2 year prior column. So when I'm about to show you the numbers, the chart's going to look just a little different because I didn't stretch it out. But you're going to see that we did, with some data capturing in the next year, have a significant uptick in the number exiting from permanent housing. So let's see, Landon, if I can try and share. All right, so this is still draft data. So we will still do quite a bit of data cleaning before this is submitted to HUD in February, because oftentimes, there are data issues. But this is that same chart, just looks a little bit different, but this would be for the year that just ended 9/30/2022. So we'd still be looking 2 years prior. Can you all see the screen? I guess that's the first thing. I can try and, I don't know if I can make it a little bit bigger.
Yeah, we can see it good.
Okay, okay, good. So I think the thing I'd been asked of how we started kind of digging all this up was, what's going on and how are we doing? So if we add these up, we'll see that it looks like we're trending. We were about 14% returns to homelessness at the 2-year mark in the prior performance period. And if we look at this most recent year, which would be 10/1/2021 to 9/30/2022, it looks like we're trending at 19% again. So that's kind of where we used to be. We were at 22%. Then the next year we were at 17%. Then we got all the way down to 14%. It looks like we might be ticking back up towards 19%. And so everyone says, well, where are they? Right. So here's the group that's being looked at, right? People who exited from each of these type of programs 2 years ago. And then we're looking at those 6-month intervals. Again, this is a 1-year interval when people fell out. So we're really concerned always about this group that falls out so quickly, right? They clearly didn't have the supports they needed to succeed. And so we want to make sure we talked quite a bit last time about strategies that we're hoping to fund that could help with that. But here we talked about that 126. So the good news is we did tick up in the year, right? So our exits from permanent housing ticked up to 271, which you can see did help, right? So the percentage from permanent housing, obviously far less if you were to add up than emergency shelter, that this is rapid rehousing is more successful in keeping people housed than emergency shelter, when they exit, that rapid rehousing is a more successful intervention. Anyway, so again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but Catherine and Landon had circled back to see if I had an update. And so I think the other thing, and I could go back to Landon, if you want to pull up the one slide where we kind of can compare like permanent housing retention with returns to homelessness. Any questions on these numbers before I slip off the screen here?
Kimberly, is there a cause why these people have left?
Every case is very much different. We are seeing that individuals in this particular year, persons with substance abuse disorders or severe and persistent mental illness, those are self-reported because that's the way we have the data in HMIS. They are returning to homelessness at higher rates than other subpopulations. I'm going to stop there. And then Landon, do we have that? Okay. So what we talked about last time was a little bit this sort of, I'm going to call it a little bit of a paradox, right? Like where the data seems to almost conflict itself, but I really explained that this is 2 different groups of people. And so we do have the draft 2022 data, and it's going to look very similar to the bar chart. We have over 600 people in HMIS that are supported and reported, right? So they are staying in a program that placed them in permanent housing with supportive services. And in our system, those folks are very much more successful than those that exit to permanent housing, at least without tracked supports, right? So these are over 600 beds that we are tracking within our system where we consistently see a 97 to 99% retention rate for those that remain in services while they're in permanent housing. And so this other chart, right, when we're talking about return to homelessness, is anyone served in any type of project that the system says exited to a permanent housing destination and then returned to the system within that 2-year period. And so how can the numbers be different? Because we're looking at 2 different groups of people, right? They overlap, but the people staying in the 600 beds where there are ongoing supports have a very high retention rate, and those who are exiting potentially without supports or adequate supports that are not being tracked in the system, we see reappear at a greater rate. So this is something where we're really working on and really want to get some resources, additional resources too. We truly believe that the dollars that are coming for community supports through SendCal Health can really help in this area for a sustainable funding stream for the kind of robust retention services that we need in our system, and some other ideas. But did want to circle back since we had some draft data from 2022 and let you know that I had worked closely this month with Ventura and San Luis to give a little more explanation for what we were witnessing last time.
Really, can I just ask, so the chart on the right is the one that you said that we anticipate is trending up towards 19, and then the chart on
Yes.
the left you anticipate will remain in a high percentage remain.
Yeah, it looks like we're right about 97, and the raw numbers, Landon, just because this is we the percentage tends to be a little bit like people are like, well, what does that really mean? And so we have been reporting it out as the number of the actual number of beds, because I think people were assuming that was a really small subset. But if I look, and it's out of 634 beds in the draft data, 616 had retained. So that means they either kept that unit that they had been placed in with permanent housing, or potentially had exited to another permanent housing unit from that unit. So that's exclusively what's being represented in that group, but that they're remaining in the system with supportive services.
Okay.
Hey, Kim, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but HUD is looking specifically more so in the overall, the chart on the right versus the left, or they both get
No.
analyzed?
Well, I was going to say, so both of these are both HUD system performance measures and state system performance metrics. So we're tend to do very well in permanent housing retention is what they call it. And then we're struggling more in the returns to homelessness. And that will be a problem. I think not everyone on the call, but the state is now funding based on some of these metrics. And of course, HUD has been doing that the last couple of years. So you always want to be doing better than yourself. You don't have to kind of compete against everyone else always, but they do want to see improvement in your system. And so the uptick, if we indeed wind up in the data that's submitted, we uptick from 14 to 19%, that would be a significant marker if we can't, kind of trend that down by the next state evaluation for funding. But they look at both.
Thanks.
Kimberly, we also had some conversation in the last time you were sharing this data about the other counties and how they're reporting exits to permanent housing in terms of whether an individual is going to, they say I'm going to stay with a family member out of county, and so that gets logged. I'm curious if you learned anything from the other counties about that.
Not so much there, but we have been working with our tech admins and hitting it in our new user training. We think part of in looking deeper at who the returns to homelessness were, especially in that first 6 months, we did notice in our data that potentially maybe we were over reporting placements in permanent housing, in that, in the most optimistic outlook of the case manager, thinking that someone going to stay with family or friends, they have the choice of choosing like temporary tenure or permanent tenure. And if they choose permanent tenure, then that would be included in this data as a permanent housing placement. But we were seeing a significant number that were within days after that note returning to the system. And so we are definitely coaching. We want everyone to be as optimistic as possible, but also as accurate as possible. And so we have been doing some retraining and having the providers specifically look at those data sets. And so if they have someone that returned in 21 days, seeing if they have other case notes or experiences that would allow them to actually, more correctly represent the exit.
Awesome.
So
Thank
that
you.
was the what part that was really in the weeds. I had showed a really long list of how difficult it is for case managers to try and pick between like 40 different options of exits. But yeah, so definitely more training going on. So we want the most accurate picture as possible.
Are there any other questions about this information? If not, we can move on.
Yeah, I thought of one more thing.
Oh.
You also kind of asked me to look at sort of, South County versus North County. And we talked about how there's a lot of different programs that are serving countywide now. But when we tried to actually take the people and, look at the programs that are South County based, we saw that those returns to homelessness were pretty equitably divided between the regions. Based on the homeless population.
That's good.
Yeah, so it didn't look like there was a, it's an overall gap in service, right? Not one area being served less than another.
Great. Landon, if you could go ahead and make me the host or co-host.
Yes, you are.
Oh, thank you.
Or wait a minute. No, you're not. My apologies.
Thanks.
Now you are.
Well, thank you for Kimberly for that. And then I know we're also going to be reviewing this information in the steering committee on Wednesday as well. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. So just a recap from the last meeting, I had shared some feedback. I was able to meet with Lived Experience Working Group and discuss the individual service plans template and how that process was working for them as they were transitioning into their new housing. And so with this group, that discussion kind of turned into the need was more of creating and training staff on best practices versus individualized service plan. So that is kind of the discussion that we're hoping to have today. I'm just recapping last meeting. Again, though, some of the feedback that we received in general, whether it was the form or just how we're supporting individuals, was not to be vague. They really wanted a lot of information and examples when we're talking about goal setting or just helping them transition into their new homes, of ideas that they might need assistance with, or kind of some tools that they could use as they're transitioning into their home. And here was some general comments and suggestions from them of wanting support with life skill building, how to build healthy networks, how to navigate community services, and really just being able to be supported through that process, like really taking someone to a new location, if they're going to go receive services, being there with them to walk them through that process the first couple of times so they get familiar with location, how to, check in, or how to just interact with the other staff at other businesses or services that we're connecting them to. And just, I think because individuals are, now living in their homes, wanting that kind of relationship with case management to be more of a mutual friendship, less of like paperwork, name tags, like that kind of social work aspect of feeling very clinical. They wanted more friendship and connection and positive encouragement. They felt that that would be the best way to increase engagement with them. So as we kind of looked and had that discussion, it led to us wanting to create, just the way that we had created the Good Neighbor Handbook, right now I'm just calling it the Good Case Manager Handbook, not set in stone, of what is the best practices when we're working with a client as they transition into their new home. And so the Good Neighbor, as a reminder, the Good Neighbor Handbook was divided into 3 sections of like how to be a good neighbor within your unit and the landlord, one like how to be a good neighbor to your neighbors, and then how to be a good neighbor to the overall neighborhood that you're residing in. So I figured maybe breaking this handbook into those 3 similar 3 sections for a case manager, where it's reviewing one more of that collaborative approach, as you know, our system now is co-enrolling individuals into programs or starting one program prior to housing, and then once they move into a unit are being transitioned into another program. So what that collaboration can look like. And then another is, you know, how do we care for clients? Some of those best practices there and tools that can work toward building that relationship as you're working with them. And then that last section is caring for yourself, of how we can, or how this work, it can be tiring, it can be taxing. You're dealing with a lot of individuals that have a broad array of needs, complex needs, and so supporting them can be challenging at times. And so how can you stay healthy through all of this so you can continue to do the work? So those are kind of the 3 sections that we were hoping to create within this handbook. And then, and so I want this to be kind of a discussion. So I'm going to go each section, kind of share the talking points or what we were hoping to put into that. And then, you know, get feedback. If there's other components for each section that you would all like to see, this is just kind of building up that draft before we really put it together. And then, you know, share the more kind of like booklet and having those paragraphs in there. So this is just kind of what I was hoping to incorporate in each section. So feel free to jump in at any time if you have any comments or questions or even suggestions. And then Landon, I don't have eyes on the chat, so if you can make sure. But I think one of the main things that we talked about last time was the discussion around a proper handoff, a warm handoff, is that different organizations are kind of doing that differently. And some of the challenges there were really, you know, how do we make sure that the new organization that is going to be supporting the individual, that they have all the information, the proper information that they need to be successful with that client. So it's really understanding like where that client currently is with their case management. So we've talked about even sharing the most recent ISP. And I know that one thing with HMIS and the coordinate entry system is we want to make sure that we're uploading individuals' documents into HMIS. So not just the ID, social security card and income and things like that, but maybe getting in the habit of also including the most current ISP into HMIS, so then that's always accessible. But making sure that current contact information is shared with the case manager. If there's any appointments that are coming up that need to be shared, so then that those appointments aren't missed, and you know, locations, doctors. Another example is social security claim. We know that that's a very challenging process for clients and case managers to navigate. So making sure that if there's a pending social security claim, that is something that is known right away, and all that information pertaining to appointments and contact information is all shared. And And then just looking at, because it is really a collaboration, we really know that a lot of folks, if someone is also dealing with mental health or substance use, that means that there's another provider that's involved. And so how we're including those other providers in the discussions. Or are they even involved in really kind of planning and how we support that individual? And then, does the client already have a support network, even if it's friends? Are they involved with their family? Are those individuals that they can bring in to support as we're working with them as well? And then I kind of put the note there, it's like, when should we bring a concern or a case to CES conferencing? I think that's another kind of great tool, that if we're facing a potential eviction, that, a lot of the work that we're doing is trying to brainstorm and problem solve so that we can resolve an issue before it gets to that point. So that was this section, and I don't know if anyone had any comments or just in general. I know Emily Allen is here on the call. If you wanted to talk to when an organization or a case manager should be bringing a point to CES case conferencing and kind of bringing that to the table so that we can hopefully prevent that individual from falling back into homelessness.
Yeah, this is Emily with County of Santa Barbara. And one thing I wanted to mention was we are now doing more at-risk case conferencing, and that's really in large part come about because of additional resources like emergency housing vouchers, but now also with what's called the Housing Disability Advocacy Project. They do allow us to increase, subsidy and supportive services for people who might be at risk. And so one thing I would mention is just really making sure that key staff are attending those at-risk case conferences and participating and engaged in that process, I think would be one key thing to make sure all the programs are thinking about, and identifying the people. Bringing them to our attention.
Okay. And that's not outside of case conferencing, right?
It's its own separate case conference. We schedule them to discuss specifically at risk. And then we have specific forums, for the emergency housing voucher or the Housing Disability Advocacy Project that people, complete in order to bring that client to our attention. And then we're able to add them and track. And as, resources can become available, work to connect them to that. And, this is really in line with a practice that's becoming more well-known, progressive engagement, the idea that, we can't always know what people's needs are through initial assessment. People's needs do change. As we see how they actually do in housing, we can have a better sense of, what level of support they might need. And it is resource dependent, but, as we have resources, we can, I think, do some really good things to keep people housed.
Great. Next section was really focusing on the individual and, how to support and build relationships with the client. And so kind of some sections within this category would be making, clarifying and defining your role as much as possible, reassuring the client that you're there to support them and advocate for them in whichever way that they need. And then because we were hearing that they want to know exactly like, what does that look like? I think giving individuals examples of the types of services or, the type of resources that you would be able to try to connect them to. And then I think the most important part that we were receiving from lived experience individuals is know the client. I think it really starts there as to, now a client's house, for the most part, like a lot of that pressure is taken off of their shoulders because now they've made it into their new home. And so I think almost pausing and giving them that time to kind of settle in and feel that calmness and getting to know them and their needs, what their strengths are, if what their triggers are. So as you're communicating with them and interacting with them on a regular basis, you're not necessarily doing anything that could cause them to get frustrated or anxious. And just really looking at, how do they want to be supported at the end of the day? How much are they, wanting you to be over? I know that obviously like some programs have requirements of visiting individuals, but just really looking to them to guide what that support looks like. And then just some things like if you're visiting someone and they weren't home, I think always good practice to leave a note that you stopped by, and when you're hoping to stop by again, even just putting your contact information, because we know that clients tend to lose a lot of information sometimes. So just always good to make sure that they have your contact information and how to get a hold of you. One thing that we're hearing a lot right now, not just to, housing retention or just generally across the board for services, is just not making promises. As much as possible, you're there to support the client and you're wanting to walk along them in this journey. And, there is an end point, but we can never make promises, but just kind of reassure them that you're there to support. And, if you do say that you're going to do something, to make sure that you are following up. And then, just kind of looking at or making sure that they know that those services are voluntary and that they can essentially opt out, but it's in their benefit. I think, again, just explaining why it's so important that you're there to support them. Another really important factor was looking at celebrating small wins with the client, no matter how small. They really appreciate that support and that growth through those moments in time. And so they want to know that, you're happy and you're proud and that they have come a long way. And then the last section before kind of open up to just questions or things was, how do you care for yourself through this whole process? Knowing kind of what makes you happy and doing more of that. Does your team have regular check-ins? Do you have a check-in with your supervisor? You can't always take things personally. When we're working with the chronic population, a lot of their behaviors are not to be taken personally. It's just kind of with everything that they're dealing with. It's not a you thing. It's just everything that they're facing. And then just always kind of having those clear boundaries, again, defining your role and how you're going to support, but then, making sure that you have personal boundaries for yourself. And then knowing your limit. So I didn't put as much here because obviously, we have a lot of providers here at the table. So I wanted to have this one more open of what are some great ways that you all have some tools that you have used in the past to really care for yourselves that you would like to share with everyone else as we create this booklet.
Has anybody thought about asking people that have been housed for over a year to help those that are just getting started since they've been through it already? Kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous or NA, where somebody that has gone through a program can go back and help another one go through it?
I really like that idea. In Kern, we had a mentoring type system. I think people were a little past the year mark, probably more like 2 or 3 years in housing before they were kind of serving in kind of peer support or mentor roles, but great idea.
And I think that the Department of Behavioral Wellness or the Mental Health Service Act feedback is going to be looking for ideas, feedback from the community that could include peer, support.
Right now, we're in the middle of restructuring our lived experience working group, and this is one of those components that we're hoping to better incorporate with that group, as well as working with the Mental Wellness Center because they have a great peer support program. So we've met with them to learn more about the program and how to best utilize it. But that is something that we're definitely aware of and wanting to bring to that lived experience working group, so then they can support individuals that need that support in their new housing, or just kind of we can lean on that group if there is an issue and if there's someone that is needing that extra support as well. And then Rob, I saw your comment, chocolate. Yes, chocolate always helps everything.
This is Ray with the VA. I would agree with the peer support model that was described. I think we mentioned earlier there was a request for like having a friendly relationship, but I think sometimes that becomes problematic when you balance that with a professional relationship and a personal boundary of a case manager. Things can get pretty blurry pretty quickly. But if you have that role separation where you have peers and you have that that built-in network that can be utilized that's outside of a case management and clinical case management, that allows for distinct roles. Clinical case management is time limited and has a very specific intent, and then there is the support that could be more organic or this peer group. I think it helps with the role clarity.
I think Alexis, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a couple things that I think could be helpful is, and I don't have the statistics on it, but I know that maybe they exist, maybe they don't, but I believe it's like best practice to, when somebody moves into housing, like how frequently they would be visited, especially early on, right? So like somebody goes into housing, like my teams need to be there within 24 hours after, they're helping them with the move-in, but they need to go straight away after. And I think figuring out how to research what some of those best practices are. Some of the feedback from the lived experience group, maybe regarding, give them some space to settle in. Just from my experience, the clients that we do give space and the clients that want more space have worse outcomes in the end. Like it's more of a scaffolding model that we've seen to be most successful, where we're heavy on engagement on the upfront, and then over time, that seems to dwindle down. So I would just be curious if there's any, national research that's been done on that in terms of housing retention, because I think early on, more frequent visits is better. And I think it's more receptive from the clients as well, because this is voluntary at that point. And so they're receptive more so early on and trying to figure everything out. So that's one thought. The other thought is on the slide where you talked about the like coordinated entry.
Okay.
Yeah, this one. I think really elaborating on collaboration would be really helpful for our community. And I wouldn't want it to wait until it needs to be raised an issue. I think that the more we can early on figure out which providers are connected, which providers have been connected, who do they have a history with, and then once we identify that, really encouraging whoever the case manager is to be working with all partners who've been involved to try to make it as successful as possible.
Yeah, I like that. And like I said, for the actual booklet, like we'll have like more like a description paragraphs introductory for each section. So I'll definitely notate the collaboration piece of how important that is and kind of what that looks like, and the timeliness of it and how important that is. Same with the frequency of visits. I know that Emily also mentioned that that's kind of is really aligned with that what were you calling it, progressive engagement, of sometimes like it's high needs, high support in the very beginning, and then it kind of phases off sometimes. So I think that that's really kind of aligned with what we're wanting to do just all throughout the system, kind of pre-housing, even not just post-housing. So I'll make sure to add that as well. Kind of I don't know if, Emily, if there's in the policies and procedures, I thought there was kind of like an example timeline in there, or
maybe in the written standards, that might be, and I mentioned before, we might want to look at our own continuum of care written standards for updates. That might be good. And one phrase I'll just add that always has stuck with me in thinking of housing first is this idea that the client doesn't have to accept the services, but we have to continue to offer the services. I think that's one way to think about that. And then just even checking the homeless management information system. I know not every case manager has direct access to it, but through your supervisor, it gives you, now that we have this more open system, it does give you a good sense of where the client has been connected, who they've worked with. That's one of the benefits we see.
Well, I don't know if anyone else had any other feedback to that. Like I said, it's just in the drafting stages of these sections. Or even if you think that was a good start. But I already definitely taking notes of some of the discussions that we had and how we can incorporate into those sections. Like the frequency of visits, I think is huge. I think defining collaboration and the importance of being proactive rather than reactive. And then the peer support. Again, that's something that we've been talking or discussing amongst internally with SB Act of how we can create that type of program or better leverage other resources in the community, like the Mental Wellness Center. So I know that is a need that we've been hearing for a while now. And so it's definitely something that we're looking into.
Catherine, I just, thank you for all the work on that. I think the one thing I was going to say is maybe at the next retention meeting that Alexis and her team, they have a PowerPoint now of kind of the EHV supportive services and how many people have been screened for mental health and how many are accepting services. And I think what we're seeing, and Alexis, you may be the better one to share, but that in the scattered site model, right, that the accepting of services, especially with for everyone on the call, with the EHV model, we made sure that it was a multidisciplinary team approach where there were substance abuse counselors, mental health clinicians, and case managers providing that support on site at the unit in the scattered site model for EHV. And so Good Samaritan has over 300 people in that program now and has kind of their first year report on supportive services. So I think that might be really helpful for everyone. I think it was a great visual for the housing authorities to see kind of how that was rolling out, because it's really our first attempt at that model in a scattered site setting.
Yeah, I would love to see that report and kind of, what components. Oh, sorry, Alexis, were you going to say something?
I was just gonna say, yeah, I'd be happy to share. Great.
And then I think with that, because Kimberly, you mentioned the next retention meeting, so the retention working group is already in collaboration with the county, and we're moving to transition all of our other working groups, so prevention, housing and shelter as well with the county. And so that's going to shift the schedule. So right now we were meeting once a month, and we're going to be switching over to the county schedule. So it'll be quarterly instead of monthly. And I think that'll just allow us to work in between the calls, any projects like this one to come online, or us to maybe do more of that research or working with other organizations that operate peer support groups, and how we can leverage those as well. So we are moving to a quarterly schedule. I'm meeting with Lucille later this week to discuss that scheduling for future agendas. And so once we have that schedule, I will circle back to the group and share the next date with you all, so you can have it on your calendar, and make sure that we have the calendar invite updated as well. But that was it for our discussion today. Thank you for being here. If no one else has any comments or any last thoughts, questions.
This is Ray again. I did have another thought. It was about the very beginning. I think you were discussing about how to be a good neighbor, and it sounded like the introduction portion of things. But my first thought would be might be an opportunity to at least discuss or put out there why you would want to be a good neighbor. Why does it matter to not only yourself but to your surrounding neighbors to be a good neighbor? That's just my thought.
Yeah, thank you. And we shared the Good Neighbor handbook with a lot of the providers during, I think you were on the call, the veterans case conferencing, the regular coordinated entry case conferencing, and then the youth specific. So we are looking to circle back with everyone and get some feedback like that of just, here's the booklet. How did it work for you all as you were using it with your clients? And just if there was any components to it that you wanted to be updated or added. So thank you, Raymond, for that. That's definitely something that we can make sure that is incorporated in that. All right. Well, in that case, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. And like I said, we will be circling back with you all once we have the next date for the retention working group, as we are moving it to a quarterly schedule. All right. Well, thank you and have a good rest of your week, and see you next time.
Thank you all.